I'm standing at the Formula One circuit here. Well, although here in Sepang, just outside KL, not far from the airport. Although I know Formula One races are not being held here anymore, but still, you can't see the circuit. Unluckily, I don't think it's really possible because it's in like down here, just behind, just over this hill, kind of. So houses everywhere here is parking for it. There's a cafe and a lake and everything like that. So let's continue with John chapter 10. This chapter, I did some recording this morning in the airport, at the international airport, where I spoke about following in the will of God, right? Because in this chapter it speaks in verse 4, it's going to speak about the sheep following, they knowing his voice, right? So it's for me kind of very fitting. Our first part, the reading part, we did in Cameron Highlands. The introduction part we did in KL and Lalaport last night, and now already kind of part there at the airport and part here. So there's movement going on. It's like a following of something. Like, and in this chapter it speaks of following Jesus, knowing the voice and following Jesus. Okay, so let's continue with that. All of that said, verse 1, John chapter 10, verse 1. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. Because that's, if you don't enter by the door, you're a thief and a robber, right? Plain simple. Well, I mean, okay, right. So if you, it happened to me, you lose a key to a house or something, and then you kind of try and find another way into your house through the back bathroom window or something like that. So that does not imply now that you are a thief and a robber. You lost your key, you forgot your key, or it's inside, or something, you locked it inside. And so now you try and find a different way in. Okay, but this understandably is not what Jesus is speaking about here, right? Because he's speaking about the sheepfold, and he's speaking that there's a door, and that you will enter the sheepfold by the door. You're not going to other people who want to steal, want to come and take what doesn't belong to them. This is not someone with a huge key that might lose a key, and then now therefore they need to come and enter in the wrong way so as to open the door from the inside, something like this. But the people doing this to a sheepfold, they will be thieves and robbers. Verse 2, but he who enters by the door is a shepherd of the sheep. So the one who enters by the door of the sheepfold, right, he is the shepherd. So the shepherd has a right, he says, I open the door for him and he goes in by the door. No need for him to climb over or sneak in. Verse 3, to him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. Right? So the gatekeeper who's inside opens the door for the shepherd because he knows the shepherd. For others, he's not going to open, so they need to come in a legal way, right? And then furthermore, the sheep is not just going to follow anyone. For a thief will need to tie his up and whatever and carry it away, kind of. He's not going to follow him, okay? So, but the shepherd, right? The sheep hears the voice of the shepherd, and he, the shepherd, that is, calls out to the sheep, and they follow him then as he leads them out. Okay, so introduction part, I spoke about the fact that if you have a little lamb with the mother died, and then you feed it and you give it milk, and it like basically grow up as like kind of in a way your kid, then it will follow you. You know your voice and will follow you. But for the other sheep, they are just the sheep growing up on its own, in a sense, just the lambs with the ewes, with the mothers. They're not going to follow you. For them to herd them, you have shepherd dogs and other ways of herding them. Okay, now, yes, example of in the Middle East in those days, the shepherd would walk ahead of the sheep, and the sheep will follow behind. I can imagine as well that's to do for protection from wild animals, etc., from the front. Right, so this is kind of the idea. So the sheep will then follow the shepherd, not go ahead. The shepherd's chasing them, but the sheep is following. And it's very apt to compare this to Jesus, who actually is the one who was leading the road for us. He was the one first into death and resurrection. Okay, there were others who died and rose before, who were brought back from the dead to in the Old Testament, and already at least there's going to be 2 here, 3 actually, at least, right? But on his own, giving up his own life, that is just that is the one who leads the way in showing us everything, as well as kind of why I always my sermons say I would rather in the sermons not speak morality per se of look at me kind of, but look at Jesus, right? Because I can't always, your pastor can't always be there to give you the example to follow or to tell you what's right and what's wrong, but you need to know Jesus. When you know Jesus, you know the truth set you free. As we've seen earlier in John, then you will know what to do under certain circumstances, even if your pastor or whoever spiritual leader is not there, and you know walk with the Spirit's not strong enough for him to be able to dictate you. But I mean, man, it's so difficult sometimes to hear the voice of the Spirit. Our voices are so loud. Sin. And yes, he calls his own sheep by name, so by name as well, he knows his sheep. Right? Verse 4. When he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. Right? So he brings in all his own. He goes before them. It shows just how it works. He goes before, the sheep follows. Why? Why do they follow? Because they know his voice. Right? Earlier in John as well, Jesus asked Peter, so don't you want to leave? He said, no, you have the words of life. They understand that Jesus has the words of life. Okay, so they know the voice. They believe, at least not fully at that stage, but they were not in the Samaritan woman's level or the blind man's level, but at least they were growing. Verse 5. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. So they won't be caught out by by a thief, right? By a wrong shepherd. Because they know the voice of their shepherd. They know the voice of the one true shepherd. That is why people will go to a church where they preach a gospel that is from the devil, prosperity gospel, liberation gospel, liberal gospel, doesn't matter, all those kinds of gospels, hyper-Calvinism. Then these guys will know that people going to those churches, it's not because they can't see that what's being taught is wrong, it's because they are not the sheep. That's just that. Because they don't know their shepherd. So they follow wrong shepherds because they don't know the true shepherd. Sorry guys, but that's just as it is. This is what Jesus is saying here. Okay, and that holds for any kind of people following any kind of other religion, but ultimately the truth. You're not following Jesus. You're following other religions. James even said people will pay money to hear what they want to hear. Right? People pay money to the pastor, so the pastor will preach to them what they want to hear. The rich in the church, those who say, don't preach about those things or they don't need to say it, but you know what their sin is, and you don't therefore preach about those things, right? Because he might go to another church, you might lose the income, the tenth of this rich person in church, and man, who's going to pay my salary? Okay? So no, that's not how it's supposed to be. There's one shepherd. So if you follow other cults and sects and other gospels, the fault is on you. Why? It shows that you are not born again because you don't know the voice of the true shepherd. You're not following the true gospel. You're not following Jesus. That's just that. But the true ones, they won't follow others. They won't follow others. They will follow Jesus. Verse 6. This figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what they were saying to them. Okay, calling the figure of speech, metaphor, whatever they wanted, like what we would call it. That's Jesus, a figure of speech, doesn't matter which one. They didn't understand. They didn't fully understand what's going on here. Because Jesus used it, he was trying to. In this chapter, he's going to elaborate more on it. They might understand a little bit more, but ultimately, they did not understand that. Okay? Still, like John is going to as well, we didn't understand. He's going to get more into that concept of we didn't understand, but then we understood. Okay, so we'll continue in a different spot with the next verse.